The rain started before dawn, soaking the Georgia soil into red clay. By the time the whistle blew at Fort Benning, my uniform was already clinging to my skin. 5 in the morning. Another training rotation. Another day to test who would break first. I was Captain Elise Ward Intelligence Division assigned to oversee survival drills for new recruits. I had seen storms both in war and in people, but that morning was different. The air was heavy with something I could not name. The recruits were running the endurance course slick mud underfoot, 30 pounds of gear on their backs. I shouted commands through the megaphone voice steady, even as lightning cracked in the distance. Then I saw her. Cadet Ava Locke, 22, small frame, running in the rear, pushing beyond her limit. She had been quiet all week, disciplined, almost too disciplined, the kind of soldier who carried invisible weight. I had noticed her hesitation around male officers, the way her gaze flicked away whenever her name was called in roll. Some scars don't show on skin. As we moved into the final leg near the ridge, the mud turned to rock. The recruits climbed the slope one by one, slipping, cursing, grabbing for roots. Ava reached halfway when her boot slipped. I saw it happen before I heard it, the sound of gravel breaking loose, the scream, her body sliding down the wet incline toward the drop. I didn't think. I ran. The rules said never leave your post during live drills, but training manuals never account for instinct. My boots hit the mud like gunfire. I dropped my radio, sprinted down the slope, and caught her wrist inches from the edge. Her glove was soaked, her pulse hammering against my palm. "Hold on!" I shouted, bracing against a tree root, digging my boots into the ground. She gasped, eyes wide, terrified but silent. "Let go of the pack." She hesitated, shaking her head. The strap was stuck. I yanked it free, nearly losing balance as the weight dragged us both. The rain turned to sheets, blinding. With one final pull, I hauled her back over the ridge, both of us collapsing in the mud. She lay still, coughing, trembling. Her lips were pale. "Stay with me," I said, checking her pulse. Faint, but steady. She blinked, focusing on me for the first time. Her eyes were blue-gray, hauntingly familiar. She whispered, voice broken by rain and fear. "Tell my father. I did my best." I froze. "Who's your father?" I asked, but her eyes fluttered shut. Medics rushed in seconds later, pulling her onto a stretcher oxygen mask over her face. I stood there, drenched hands, shaking heart, pounding harder than any battlefield I'd known. The rain blurred everything into silence. Hours later, I sat outside the medical wing, mud dried on my sleeves, trying to replay every second. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt dread. The commanding officer arrived, expression unreadable. "Captain Ward," he said, "General Locke wants to see you." The name hit harder than the storm. General Thomas Locke, the same man who had testified in front of Congress on discipline and duty. The man every cadet idolized, the man rumored to have built his career on silence. I followed the officer into headquarters. The corridor smelled of coffee and disinfectant, the fluorescent lights humming above. Inside the office, the world shifted. The first thing I saw was the nameplate MAJ, General Thomas Locke. The second was the photograph on his desk, a younger girl with those same blue-gray eyes smiling beside a flag. He turned when I entered, posture-perfect face carved in authority. "Captain Ward," he said, "you were in charge of this morning's drill." "Yes, sir." "And you left your station." "A cadet fell, sir. She would have died." His gaze sharpened. "Discipline saves lives, Captain. Recklessness costs them." I swallowed hard. "Sir, she's stable. Cadet Ava Locke." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You've done your duty. You'll file your report and nothing more. With respect, sir, she—" "That's an order." His voice cut like a blade. There was something in his eyes, something between fear and fury. He dismissed me with a curt nod. As I turned to leave, my gaze drifted once more to the photograph. The same girl, the same eyes. I felt the air go cold. The truth hit like thunder. The cadet I had saved was his daughter, and for some reason he wanted that fact buried. That night I couldn't sleep. The barracks were quiet except for the steady hum of rain on the tin roof. I sat on the edge of my bunk uniform, folded boots lined up, staring at my hands. I had always believed saving a life was the highest honor a soldier could earn. But as the storm raged outside and orders tightened like chains, I realized something else. In the Army, not every rescue is rewarded. Some are erased. Voiceover, I thought saving a life was the highest honor a soldier could earn, until it cost me my own. Would you have risked your career to save someone? Drop your city below. The morning after the rescue, the base was unnaturally quiet. Rain still clung to the windows, streaking down the glass like sweat after a battle. I had not slept. My uniform was clean, my face calm, but inside, my pulse had not slowed since the moment Ava Locke slipped from that ridge. I was ordered to appear before the Internal Review Board at 0900. I'd been in interrogation rooms before, but never as the subject. The conference room smelled of burnt coffee and stale air. 3 officers sat behind a polished table, their insignias gleaming under fluorescent light. The middle one, Colonel Nathan Pierce, tapped his pen once before speaking. "Captain Ward," he began, "you're aware of why you're here." "Yes, sir." "To provide a statement on the training incident." "Not just provide," he said. "To explain why you violated procedure." I kept my hands folded. A cadet was in immediate danger. I acted under emergency judgment. His pen stopped. "Emergency judgment doesn't apply to supervised training. You left your designated post. If I hadn't, Cadet Locke would be dead." He exchanged glances with the other officers, then opened a file. My own handwriting stared back at me, training schedules, my initials, my signature. "Captain, the issue isn't the cadet's fall. It's your response." His tone softened, but only slightly. "You're a decorated officer, 10 years of service commendations from Quantico. You know how the system works. When you go off script, it creates ripples." I wanted to ask what kind of system punishes instinct, but I bit my tongue. "Understood, sir?" "Good," he said. "Now tell us exactly what the cadet said before she lost consciousness." The question tightened my chest. She said, "Tell my father I did my best." Well, Colonel Pierce's expression didn't change, but one of the junior officers scribbled something furiously in his notes. "And you're sure that's what you heard?" "Yes, sir." He nodded once and closed the file. "That will be all for now." The door opened and a figure stepped in before I could move. His presence changed the temperature of the room. General Thomas Locke. The last person I wanted to see. The board stood at attention. I followed out of reflex even as my throat went dry. "Gentlemen," Locke said smoothly, his voice carrying that calm authority that silenced rooms. "I'll take it from here." The officers nodded and filed out, leaving us alone. The door clicked shut behind them. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the overhead lights. "Captain Ward," he said at last, walking toward the table. "You've had quite a morning." I straightened. "Sir, my report is ready for submission." He nodded slowly, his eyes unreadable. "I've read it. Every word." He placed a file folder on the table and flipped it open. My report was inside, but stamped across the top in red letters, "Classified." "Sir," I said with respect that classification isn't standard for a training accident. "It is," now he replied, his voice measured. "Effective immediately, you are to sign a confidentiality order. No discussion of this incident, no communication with other personnel, no statements beyond the official narrative." Official narrative, I repeated carefully. "The cadet suffered a training injury during an obstacle exercise. You responded per procedure." "That's not what happened." He looked up sharply, his tone steel beneath the calm. "It is now." The room went colder. I took a step back, forcing my breathing steady. "Sir Cadet Locke mentioned her father." "Is she alive?" he cut in. "That's all you need to know." "Sir, she captain," he interrupted again, his voice dropping to a lower, quieter register. "Let me make this clear. This discussion does not leave this room. The board's recommendation is pending. Your record is clean for now. Let's keep it that way." He slid the confidentiality order across the table. My hand hovered above the pen. Every instinct screamed not to sign. "Sir," I said slowly, "I acted under duty. Saving her wasn't a breach of discipline. It was a human reaction." "You sound like a civilian," he said evenly. The Army doesn't reward emotion. It rewards obedience. With respect, sir, obedience didn't save her life. His jaw clenched. You're walking a dangerous line, Captain. I met his gaze steady despite the tremor in my gut. The line was already crossed, sir. I just happened to be standing there when it broke. He stared at me for a long time as if measuring how much of me could be bent before breaking. Then without a word, he turned the pen toward me. I signed. The ink bled slightly into the paper, my name swallowed by red letters. He took the file, closed it, and said quietly, "You've done your part, Captain. Dismissed." I saluted, turned, and walked out, my boots echoing against the polished floor. Outside, the hallway stretched long and sterile. A young officer passed me, carrying a folder labeled Incident, Fort Benning, 2018. Through the thin paper, I saw the name printed in black: Cadet Ava Locke, 22 years old. Injuries, contusions, concussion, non-fatal. Status transferred. Transferred. Not hospitalized, not discharged, transferred. My pace slowed. Something was off. In military language, transferred could mean anything from reassignment to disappearance. I reached for my phone, tempted to check hospital logs, but the confidentiality order felt heavy in my pocket like a loaded weapon pointed inward. Back at my quarters, I sat at the desk, staring at the order again. My signature, his name, the same red stamp, classified. Outside, thunder rolled faintly over the horizon. For the first time in a decade of service, I felt the ground shift beneath the structure I trusted. Orders were supposed to protect truth, not bury it. I had saved a life, and somehow that act had become a secret. Something was wrong. I didn't know what yet, but I could feel it the way a soldier feels a storm before it breaks. And storms, once they start, don't stop for rank or reason. 3 weeks later, I was transferred out of Fort Benning without ceremony. No commendation, no explanation. Just a line in my reassignment orders that read, Captain Elise Ward, U.S. Army Intelligence, attached to Joint Command, Arlington, Virginia. Transfers happen every day in the military, but this one felt like exile. I told myself it was just protocol, but deep down I knew better. Fort Benning had become a place that whispered. My name had been crossed off a list somewhere, quietly, efficiently, the way the Army buries things it doesn't want seen. The first morning at the Pentagon compound, the walls felt too clean. Everything was polished metal-controlled, light, silent corridors. My new office overlooked the Potomac, a view people would kill for, but I couldn't stand the reflection of my own face in the window. I went through motions, files, briefings, secure comms, but every night when I closed my eyes, I saw the same image, Ava's hand slipping, her terrified eyes meeting mine, and that last whisper, "Tell my father I did my best." The words looped in my mind until sleep became a stranger. I woke at odd hours, drenched in sweat, the sound of rain from that morning echoing in my skull. People around me noticed. Lieutenant Harper, my junior analyst, once asked if I was sleeping. I said I was fine. That's what soldiers say when they aren't. 2 months passed. The bass rhythms of paperwork dulled the edges of memory. But one afternoon, during a logistics meeting, I saw the name Locke flash on a classified brief about defense appropriations. My throat tightened. It was a report on personnel budgets under General Thomas Locke's oversight. The file was marked archived, restricted to command level. I shouldn't have felt anything, but I did. The past wasn't done with me. After the meeting, I lingered by the hallway coffee stand, watching officers stream past in their perfect uniforms, their perfect obedience. I almost turned away when I heard a voice behind me. Ward, Elise Ward. I turned. A familiar face, Major Davis Cole. We had served together 6 years earlier in Kabul, back when idealism still had room to breathe. He looked older now, eyes lined, hair thinning, but his handshake was the same firm, deliberate. "Didn't think I'd see you here," he said. "You disappeared after Benning." I forced a smile. "Reassigned. That what they're calling it these days?" His tone carried more weight than the words. "What are you hearing?" I asked. He shrugged. "Same whispers everyone hears. You pulled a cadet off a cliff, made a general uncomfortable, and somehow ended up doing desk work. Sounds like the Army I know." I exhaled slowly. "You heard about her. The Cadet Locke's daughter, right?" He lowered his voice. You didn't hear it from me, but that family's been radioactive for years. Meaning? He hesitated, then leaned closer. There was an internal investigation back in 26. Domestic disturbance. Report went missing within a week. You're saying General Locke. I'm saying don't ask. He cut in, voice sharp now. You've seen what happens to people who ask too much. That report vanished because someone wanted it gone. Probably the same reason you're pushing paper instead of leading a unit. My pulse ticked faster. You think he's capable of hurting his family? Cole's eyes met mine, steady but tired. I think men like Locke don't see family. They see control. Everything's about power. You challenge that you pay. He finished his coffee and tossed the cup. Look, you didn't hear this from me, all right. Keep your head down, Ward. Men like him don't bury rumors. They bury people. He walked away before I could respond. The words followed me back to my office, bouncing off the glass walls. I sat staring at the city beyond the river, the monuments the illusion of order, and wondered how deep the rot ran. That night, I couldn't shake the conversation. I opened my laptop and typed Locke 2006 domestic incident into the internal database. The search spun, then returned no record found. I refined the query, changing keywords, dates, units. Nothing. It was as if the event never existed. I leaned back, rubbed my eyes, and stared at the ceiling. The Army was a machine built on records. When something vanished, it wasn't by accident. I closed the laptop and sat in silence. In the glass reflection, the city lights looked like distant fires. For a long time, I thought about Ava, about that small tremor in her voice when she said she had done her best. What had she been trying to prove to a father who saw obedience as love? Somewhere between discipline and fear she had fallen, and I had pulled her back, but the system had chosen silence over truth again. Around midnight, I drove out past the city line into the rural dark beyond Arlington. I stopped at an overlook facing the base lights in the distance. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. I thought about calling Cole again, asking for details, but he was right. The kind of truth he hinted at didn't live long in daylight. Still, I couldn't stop the need to know. The phrase "missing report" kept circling my mind like a siren. Somewhere out there, a paper trail existed. Someone had written that report before it disappeared. I had spent a decade gathering intelligence on foreign enemies. Maybe it was time to turn those skills inward. The wind off the Potomac cut through the open window, cold and sharp. In its sound, I heard something I hadn't felt since the rescue at Fort Benning. Not fear, but purpose. If General Locke had built his empire on buried secrets, then maybe it was time someone started digging. The Pentagon archives were supposed to be sterile, predictable, safe. Rows of metal drawers, fingerprint locks, humming air vents, order in its purest form. But order can be a mask, and sometimes the cleanest rooms hide the dirtiest secrets. That afternoon, I was reviewing an unrelated personnel file for a logistics audit when a glitch in the database threw me into an older directory labeled Incident Reports, Archived Clearance. I almost clicked away until I saw one phrase highlighted in faded yellow: domestic incident redacted. The file number started with 06AL Locke. My pulse slowed, then spiked. 06 stood for 226AL for Alabama Locke for the officer under review. I opened the record. Half the lines were blacked out, but enough remained to chill me. Subject: General Thomas Locke, then Colonel. Location: Huntsville, AL. Involved parties: spouse and minor child. Below that, the section marked Resolution was entirely censored except for one line at the bottom: Case closed, internal disciplinary record expunged by command authority. I sat there staring at those words, my stomach tightening. I had seen redactions before: intel protection, national security, but this wasn't that. This was personal. Someone had deliberately buried a domestic abuse case under the same mechanisms meant for classified warfare operations. I printed the file, just one copy, slipped it between unrelated folders, and locked it in my drawer. All day, the paper felt like it was burning through the metal. I kept seeing Ava's face, her voice whispering, "Tell my father." And now I understood what she might have meant. That night, I called Major Cole. He answered on the second ring. "You found something, didn't you?" he said before I could speak. "You knew," I said quietly. "You knew about the report." He didn't deny it. Ward, I told you to let it go. You said it disappeared. It didn't. It's here buried under restricted clearance. I saw it. Silence stretched long enough for me to hear my own heartbeat. How much, he asked finally. Enough to know it wasn't an accident. I heard him exhale. Jesus, what happened in 2006? Davis, you really want to know? Yes. He lost his temper. Cole said flatly. Neighbors called the police. His wife was hospitalized, his daughter traumatized. The local unit filed a report, but it was pulled within days. The colonel in charge of his review board was transferred, then promoted. The witnesses were reassigned. Everything just vanished. And no one said anything. People tried. The ones who did don't wear the uniform anymore. I pressed a hand to my forehead. And now his daughter's back in the system under him. Yeah, maybe trying to prove she's not him. Or maybe running from him, I murmured. Either way, Cole said you don't want to be part of it. He's untouchable, Elise. Every general has ghosts but his walk with a gun. His tone shifted from weary to sharp. Don't dig there, Elise. Men like him bury people. You think that's a threat? I think it's history. I stared at the dark window of my office. He's not going to bury me. That's what the others said. He hung up before I could answer. I sat alone in the blue glow of the monitor, the hum of the HVAC system sounding like breath on the back of my neck. The file lay open beside me, its redacted blocks like tombstones. Somewhere behind those black lines was the truth about Ava's life, her fear, and why Locke wanted everything erased. I knew better than to print classified materials, but instinct overruled regulation. I scanned the document into an encrypted drive I kept from my field days, one never registered with military servers. Old habits die harder than regulations. As the progress bar crawled across the screen, I caught my reflection eyes ringed with exhaustion expression, too calm for what I was doing. Maybe this was what obsession looked like. Quiet, methodical, unstoppable. When the upload finished, I slid the drive into a hollow compartment inside my duffel. If Locke had covered up one incident, there could be more. I logged back into the database tracing keywords through cross-referenced internal memos. 2 more matches appeared, one labeled Confidential Mentorship Program 2014, Locke, and another reassignment evaluation. Cadet AL Ava Locke. The 2014 report described a mentorship initiative for officer candidates under Locke's direct oversight. The second file, the reassignment form, showed Ava had been moved from one base to another twice before Fort Benning. Both transfers cited emotional instability and disciplinary strain. No medical record, no counseling log, no follow-up. Everything framed to make her look like a problem, not a victim. My hand tightened on the mouse. This was not just corruption. This was erasure dressed as procedure. I sat back, exhaling hard. Outside, Arlington's skyline flickered under the night rain. I remembered Cole's voice, men like him bury people. I knew what he meant now. Not graves, not literal, but reputations, records, entire histories. Ava had tried to prove herself, and in doing so, she walked straight back into the shadow of the man she feared most. My phone buzzed on the desk, a blocked number. I hesitated, then answered. Captain Ward, a calm voice said male precise. This is a courtesy reminder. You're in possession of restricted materials. Return all unauthorized copies to Command Compliance by 0800. My throat dried. Who is this? Consider this your only warning, the voice said, then hung up. I sat frozen, staring at the silent phone. The only way anyone could know was if the file had been flagged the moment I printed it. They were watching. I turned off the light, grabbed my duffel, and walked out into the corridor. The hall was empty, the sound of my boots echoing off the tile. Somewhere far above, I imagined Locke sitting in his office, calm, untouchable, his secrets locked behind polished steel doors. But secrets have weight, and sooner or later, weight sinks everything it protects. As I stepped outside, the night wind hit me like a challenge. For years, I'd been trained to find threats in foreign shadows. Now the threat was homegrown, dressed in stars and medals. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just about a rescued cadet or a redacted file. This was about how deep the system would go to protect one man's name. Richmond looked peaceful from the highway, its skyline small against the gray morning clouds. The kind of town that hid its scars behind history plaques and manicured lawns. I hadn't been there in years, but the address in the old personnel file was still burned into my mind. Martha Locke, 1421 Bellevue Avenue. The name alone had kept me awake for 2 nights. I told myself I was only following a lead, but deep down I knew this trip was personal. The farther I drove from the Pentagon, the quieter the world became until only the wipers and the sound of rain against glass kept me company. I parked in front of a narrow 2-story house with peeling blue paint and a flag hanging limp on the porch. The yard was neat but tired, the kind that spoke of someone trying to hold their life together 1 inch at a time. I walked up the steps, knocked twice. The woman who opened the door looked older than her years, thin, cautious of face that had learned to read danger before it spoke. "Mrs. Locke," I asked. Her eyes flicked to the ID clipped to my jacket. "Your Army," she said flatly. "Not anymore," I replied. "I'm here about your daughter." Her hand tightened on the doorframe. "What about Ava?" "She's alive," I said quickly. "But there are things I need to understand." She stared for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Come in before the neighbors start watching." The living room was small, filled with soft light from a single lamp and the faint smell of lemon cleaner. Family photos lined the shelf. Ava at 6, smiling with missing teeth. Ava in a school uniform, then nothing after age 13. "She never let me take new ones," Martha said quietly, noticing my gaze. "Said pictures made it too easy to be found." I sat down across from her. "You and General Locke are separated." "Separated." She laughed bitterly. "That's a polite word. He doesn't let go of things. Not jobs, not people. He's still in contact with you, no. But he doesn't have to be. He still sends people, lawyers, accountants, sometimes soldiers in plain clothes pretending to check on me. They never ask about me. Always about Ava." I took a slow breath. When did she enlist 2 years ago? She didn't tell me until after basic. She thought the Army would keep her safe. Said if she wore the uniform, he couldn't touch her anymore. Martha looked down at her hands, trembling slightly. "I warned her that power doesn't stop at the gate. Did he ever hurt her?" The question came out quieter than I meant. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood and walked to a cabinet, pulling out a small cassette recorder, the old kind with buttons that clicked loud. "You're not the first one to ask that," she said. "A journalist called once years ago after the 2006 incident. The story never ran. The reporter moved away. But I kept this." She pressed play. The tape hissed. Then a voice, young frightened, filled the room. "He said I made him look weak. He said soldiers don't cry. I didn't mean to drop the plate." A pause, then the sound of a woman's voice. Martha's, soft but trembling. "It's okay, baby. You're safe now." The tape clicked off. Martha's hand lingered on it. "She was 12, she whispered. "After that night, I told him we needed help. He told me we needed discipline." My throat tightened. "The report from that incident disappeared. Did you ever see it once?" Then it vanished from my attorney's office. "They said it was sealed under federal review." "Do you know what that means?" "It means someone with authority intervened," I said. "He did," she replied. "He called in favors, said it was a private matter, and the Army agreed." She leaned forward. "You think I don't know what happens behind closed doors in this country? Men like him wrap their sins in flags and call it duty." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She was long past tears. When Ava turned 18, she ran. Straight into the system that protected him. She thought if she became a soldier, she'd earn the respect he never gave her. Maybe then he'd stop pretending she was broken. "And you let her." "You ever try stopping a storm?" she said. She needed to prove something to him, to herself. I think she believed that if she faced pain on her own terms, it wouldn't control her anymore. I pulled a small digital recorder from my jacket and set it on the table. "Mrs. Locke, would you be willing to give a statement?" "For the record." She hesitated. "You think that will change anything?" "It might," I said. "And if not, it's proof that someone tried." She looked at the recorder, then at me. "You risk your career for this." "It's already gone." "Then why?" "Because someone has to." She pressed her lips together, then nodded once. Fine, but you don't use my name until it's safe. Understood. I hit record. This is Captain Elise Ward U.S. Army Intelligence Division, documenting a civilian testimony related to General Thomas Locke. Her voice was steady when she began. My name is Martha Locke. I was married to Thomas Locke for 20 years. During that time, I witnessed multiple acts of violence and control directed at me and our daughter Ava. She continued, her tone clinical, detached, as if reading from a medical report. She spoke of nights filled with shouting, of doors slammed, of a man who could charm senators by day and terrorize his family by night. She described how Ava hid bruises with long sleeves, how she stopped speaking for weeks, how she flinched whenever a man raised his voice. When she finished, the silence in the room felt heavier than the air. I turned off the recorder. Thank you, I said quietly. What will you do with it? I don't know yet, I admitted. But it won't stay buried. She nodded, then reached across the table, gripping my hand. He'll come for you next, she said. He always does. I squeezed back. Let him try. When I left the house, the rain had stopped, but the air still smelled of thunder. I slid the recorder into my coat pocket. Every instinct told me I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Somewhere back in Arlington, Locke would feel the tremor, and when men like him sense a threat, they don't sleep, they strike. The note was waiting for me on the windshield of my Jeep, folded neatly under the wiper blade like a parking ticket. The handwriting was blocky, almost deliberate, the kind of printing you'd learn in basic training. Stop digging or we dig your grave. No signature, no address, just 7 words that turned the early morning air into something colder. I stood there in the Pentagon parking lot, pretending to read it twice, just long enough for anyone watching to see me process the message. Then I folded it once, slipped it into my pocket, and walked inside as if nothing had happened. Routine is the best armor against fear. Inside my office, I locked the door and unfolded the note again. The paper was standard issue field stationery, the kind you only get from military supply. Whoever left it wanted me to know they were close. The words weren't idle. They were a test. I had seen intimidation before, but this felt more intimate, like someone whispering just behind my shoulder. I turned the note over, looking for fingerprints, marks, anything. Nothing but the faint smell of oil and rain, the same scent that clung to Fort Benning that morning. That memory came rushing back, Ava's hand slipping the rain, her voice fading. I saw it every night now, not as it happened, but as a loop that never ended. In the dream, I always caught her too late. Sometimes she screamed, sometimes she didn't. I started waking at 2 a.m., drenched in sweat, my body half expecting to feel her weight pulling me down. Sleep had become a battlefield I couldn't win. I needed air. I walked down to the garage, scanning every parked vehicle. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place, which made it worse. Whoever left that note knew my schedule, my car, my habits. It wasn't random. It was surveillance. I drove out of Arlington that night, away from the sterile order of the Pentagon, to an old diner just off Route 1 where the coffee tasted like metal and the waitresses didn't ask questions. I sat in the corner booth and opened my phone. The last person I wanted to call was the only one I could trust. Detective Ray Holden, Houston PD, retired. We'd met 5 years ago on a joint counterintelligence case involving weapons smuggling through Texas ports. He was one of the few civilians who'd ever told me the truth without flinching. When his number rang through, his voice sounded the same, low, sandpapered, steady. "Ward," he said. "Been a long time." "Not long enough," I replied. "You still dealing in bad news every day? You sound like someone about to ruin mine." "I might need a second set of eyes," I said. "Something off the books. You finally step in it more like someone left it on my car." I read the note aloud. He whistled softly. "That's not amateur work. You got enemies, Captain, only the kind with medals." "Well, congratulations," he said dryly. "You're officially in the club." "I need a trace," I said. "Paper-type ink, maybe surveillance footage if you can get it." "You're still in D.C. "Yeah." "Then don't talk on that phone again. Burner only. And stop parking in the same spot twice." "You think it's serious? I think if it wasn't, they'd have sent flowers." His voice softened. "You want to tell me what this is about?" I hesitated. "A cadet. Her name's Ava Locke." The line went quiet. Locke as in General Thomas Locke. You know him. Everybody in law enforcement knows him. His name comes up every time someone asks where the money went. There's more, I said. His daughter nearly died during training. I saved her. Now everyone wants that story erased, and you're not letting it go. Would you? No, he said after a moment. But I've buried enough friends to know how it ends. I leaned back, rubbing my temples. You still got your contacts in federal forensics. Maybe. What do you need? Confirmation that this threat didn't come from outside the system. If it's internal, I need proof before I go to command. You planning to take this up the chain? I'm planning to find out how high the chain goes. He chuckled softly. You never learned, did you? The higher the rank, the deeper the mud. Send me an address, I said. I'll meet you halfway. Don't, he said quickly. Stay where you are. I'll come to you. But if you're being watched, you need to disappear for a few days. That's not possible. Then make it possible, he snapped. You're not chasing smugglers anymore, Ward. You're poking a bear in uniform. I ended the call with a promise to update him in 24 hours. Outside, the rain had started again, small drops hitting the asphalt in rhythmic taps. I watched them blur through the windshield, my reflection fading between the streaks. Fear wasn't new to me. What was new was its intimacy, the sense that this threat wasn't meant to scare me away, but to see how far I'd go. When I got back to my apartment, the lights in the hallway flickered. The building was government housing, secure entry security cameras at every corner. Still, when I opened the door, something felt off. The air smelled faintly of aftershave that wasn't mine. I checked the drawers. Everything was in place except for one, the desk where I'd hidden Martha Locke's recording. The recorder was gone. My pulse froze. Whoever had been here knew exactly what to take. I checked the doorframe, no signs of forced entry. Military precision. I sank into the chair, staring at the empty drawer. I wasn't paranoid anymore. I was compromised. The message on my Jeep wasn't a warning. It was confirmation. They were already inside. I pulled out my notebook and wrote 3 words. Find Holden fast. Then I tore the page out and burned it in the sink. The flame caught instantly, curling the edges into black. Watching it turn to ash, I realized the truth I'd been avoiding. This wasn't just Locke's secret anymore. Now it was mine too. Detective Ray Holden met me 2 days later at a quiet coffee shop near Quantico. He wore the same weathered leather jacket he had back in Houston, the kind that smelled faintly of smoke and old cases. When he slid into the booth across from me, he didn't speak at first. He placed a thin manila envelope on the table between us. Found your ghost, he said. I opened it carefully. Inside was a photocopy of a report header stamped Training Accident, Fort Benning 2018. The date matched the morning Ava fell. The first page looked familiar, official Army formatting, injury descriptions, procedural statements, but halfway down, my stomach turned. Under medical officer, the signature read, Dr. L. Spencer. I knew the real doctor had been Captain Lisa Spencer, someone I had spoken to right after the incident, but the handwriting here wasn't hers. Holden watched my face tighten. Recognize it. It's supposed to be her, I said. Except it isn't. He nodded. Good eye. The signature's traced. Whoever forged it wasn't sloppy, though they used a carbon duplicate, not ink. Meaning it was faked during reproduction, not after. Exactly, which means it came from inside the chain of custody. I turned the pages slowly. The narrative of the incident had been altered. Cadet sustained minor injuries due to self-inflicted misstep. No external interference noted. My hands clenched. Self-inflicted, I whispered. They're saying she fell because of herself. They're saying you weren't there, Holden said. The line hit harder than I expected. In their version, I didn't exist. My rescue never happened. Ava Locke wasn't pulled from the edge by another soldier. She was just another name on a report padded to protect someone else. I flipped to the last page. The approving officer, Majay, General Thomas Locke. Of course. You see the seal, Holden asked, tapping the corner. It's embossed. That's not a copy of a copy. That's the original submission. I could barely breathe. He didn't just bury the truth, I said quietly. He rewrote it. Holden nodded, and the doctor transferred 3 months after I said. To Germany. No contact since. I can find her, he offered. You sure you want me to? I stared down at the report again. The room seemed to tilt around it. Every word on the page was a lie pretending to be order. Find her, I said. If she's still alive, she'll talk. He folded the envelope shut, tucking it back into his jacket. You realize this isn't a one-man job anymore, Ward. You're going after a decorated general. That's a suicide mission. I'm not after him, I said. I'm after the truth. He smirked, half impressed, half worried. Same thing. As he stood to leave, I caught his arm. Ray. Be careful. He's watching me. He nodded. Then let him. Men like him think civilians are blind. We're not. After he left, I sat in silence. The report still burned into my vision. It was perfect, too perfect. Clean margins, balanced spacing, uniform font. Every falsehood wrapped in professionalism. That was the genius of institutional corruption. It never looked messy. It looked official. I drove back to my apartment under gray skies, thinking of Ava again, of how the world could erase someone so completely. Inside, I pulled up the archived training records on my encrypted drive and compared the original log I had written that morning with the altered one Holden found. The timestamps didn't match. My entry had been recorded at 05:37. The forged one said 06:02. Same exercise, same event, but rewritten 30 minutes later after Locke arrived on site. That gap was the window of manipulation. I traced the metadata trail following the digital breadcrumbs through the Army's internal network. Someone had accessed my report from a restricted IP tagged COMCMD Locke unit. My heart raced. He hadn't even bothered to hide the signature. Power didn't need to hide when it could intimidate. I took screenshots, encrypted the files, and saved duplicates on 3 separate drives. My desk was covered in paper, the walls lined with redacted pages. Somewhere in the noise of data, the truth was screaming, but the Army spoke in whispers. Late that night, Holden called again. Got something for you, he said. Talked to a medic at Benning who remembered the morning after the fall. She said she was told to change Ava's vitals in the logbook before submission, told by who, her commanding officer. And he said the general wanted it handled discreetly. I sat back, pressing a hand to my forehead. So it wasn't just the report. He coerced medical staff. Ward, you need to slow down, Holden warned. He's got friends in every branch. The second you push too hard, you'll vanish under a dozen procedural reviews. Then I'll go public, I said quietly. Not yet, he said. You don't have enough proof. You've got threads, you need the weave. Then find me the rest. He sighed. You're gonna get both of us killed. Maybe, I said, but at least someone will know why. After the call, I poured myself a cup of cold coffee and stared at the photo pinned above my desk, Ava in uniform, standing straight pride, hiding exhaustion. The lie they built around her wasn't just to protect Locke's reputation. It was to erase her voice. She had tried to earn the father's respect who broke her spirit, and the Army helped him do it. My hand trembled as I wrote a note to myself on a yellow pad. If the system protects the powerful, the powerless have to become dangerous. The next morning, I handed in my leave request, 7 days, no questions asked. On the form, I listed my reason simply as personal reconciliation. No one would question it. I was going off-grid. Before I locked my office, I looked at the sealed envelope on the desk, Holden's copy of the falsified report. The symbol of a system that valued silence more than honor. I slipped it into my jacket and whispered under my breath, You taught me to follow orders, General. This time I'm following the truth. Ever seen a system protect its own? Tell me your thoughts. The past has a smell. Old carpet cigarette smoke rain on wood that's never been repaired. That's what filled my senses when I opened the envelope Holden handed me a week later. Inside was a small stack of papers, some photocopies, one handwritten letter sealed in plastic. On top, a note from him in quick scrawl from Martha's storage box. Found during follow-up. You should read it alone. I sat at my desk, blinds-drawn laptop closed, the hum of Arlington traffic distant like another world. The first page was an old police intake report from 26. Half the lines were crossed out, but what remained was enough to make my hands shake. Minor child present during altercation. Visible bruising on spouse's forearm. Husband identified as Colonel Thomas Locke. Charges declined pending review by commanding officer. The words bled into each other as I imagined the scene, Ava 13 watching her mother brace for another blow while uniforms stood outside pretending not to hear. The report ended with a sentence that turned my stomach. Family relocated to Fort Jackson for officer reassignment. Domestic concern deemed resolved. Resolved. That was the word the system used to erase pain. I flipped to the next page. A photograph slightly blurred of a front porch light shattered a doorframe splintered near the lock. In the background, a small figure stood on the lawn, arms crossed tight against her chest hair falling into her face. Ava. I exhaled through clenched teeth, forcing the image to stay still. For all the military codes and oaths I had memorized, none of them prepared me for the quiet violence people commit behind their own doors. The final item in the envelope was a folded letter in lined paper, the kind you'd find in a school notebook. I hesitated before touching it. The handwriting was careful, too mature for a girl her age, but still uncertain, as if every word had been rehearsed. Mom, if I don't come home, it's not the army that killed me. It's the things I thought I'd left behind. The rest of the letter was a mix of fear and determination. I just want him to see that I can be strong. Maybe if I wear the uniform, he'll stop calling me weak. If I fall, don't let him tell you it was my fault. The paper blurred as I read it again and again. Each sentence was a wound stitched into words. Ava hadn't joined the army for glory. She had joined to escape a war that started in her own house. I set the letter down and stared at the wall. The ghosts in this case weren't metaphors, they were living memories breathing through files and photographs trapped by signatures and ranks. The realization hit hard. Ava's training accident hadn't been random. She was running from something long before she ever set foot on that course. Locke's control over her didn't end when she enlisted, it evolved. He had turned the institution she trusted into another weapon of silence. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was Holden. You read it, he asked. Yeah, I said, voice low. Then you know what you're up against. I knew before I said. Now I just have proof. Careful what you call proof. The more you find, the harder they'll hit back. Let them, I said. I'm done playing safe. He paused. You sound like her. Maybe she was right, I replied. Maybe wearing the uniform doesn't make you safe. Maybe it just teaches you how to fight. When the call ended, I pulled up my secure drive and scanned every document I had collected, the falsified report, the redacted domestic file, the recordings from Martha, the letter now sitting under the lamplight. Together, they painted a portrait of a man protected by a system too proud to admit rot. But pride is brittle. It cracks when truth applies enough pressure. I thought of my oath again to defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Maybe this was what that really meant. I opened a new file and titled it Project Legacy. The first entry was short, just a promise written in plain language. I will not let Ava Locke be another redacted name. My hand trembled as I typed the next line. If the army refuses to face its own darkness, I will drag it into daylight myself. The city outside was fading into dusk. In the reflection on my window, I saw my own eyes, hollow but steady. I whispered the line from her letter out loud. If I don't come home, it's not the army that killed me, and felt something settle inside me, a quiet rage sharpened into focus. I folded the letter back into its sleeve, sealed it, and placed it with the rest of the evidence. From that moment, I stopped thinking like a soldier following orders. I started thinking like an investigator preparing for war. Locke had spent years rewriting history to make himself untouchable. I was going to make sure the world finally read the unedited version. Before I shut down for the night, I scrawled one last note on my desk pad. Truth is the only weapon they can't disarm. Then I looked at the ceiling and said softly, I'll finish what you started, Ava. I swear it. I stood outside Colonel Grant's office for almost a full minute before knocking. His door was always closed, a small reminder that power in the army wasn't just about rank, but about privacy. When I finally stepped inside, the air smelled of coffee leather and the faint tang of metal polish. He was behind his desk, sleeves rolled, glasses perched low on his nose as he studied a report I knew too well, the falsified Fort Benning accident file. Without looking up, he said, You've been busy, Captain Ward. My throat tightened. Sir, if this is about the report, I can explain. I'm sure you can, he interrupted, finally lifting his gaze. His expression was calm, but his eyes were sharp. What I can't explain is why one of my intelligence officers is reopening a case that's been closed for 5 years. Because it was closed under false pretenses, sir, I said firmly. I have reason to believe General Locke manipulated the official account of his daughter's training accident. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. You're accusing a decorated general of falsifying military records. I'm not accusing, I said quietly. I'm showing you evidence. I slid the printed documents across the desk. Holden's copy, the original scan, the metadata trail. He flipped through them slowly, then stopped at the signature page. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? Captain with respect, sir? Yes. A man who thinks his uniform makes him untouchable. Grant sighed and set the papers down. Thomas Locke isn't just a general. He's a political asset. The Senate Armed Services Committee practically keeps him on speed dial. Half of Washington owes him a favor. So we protect him, I said. We look the other way. We survive, he corrected. His voice softened almost paternal. I've seen careers destroyed for less than what you're implying. Men who thought truth would shield them. It never does. Then what does I asked? Silence. He looked at me for a long time. Loyalty. To who I shot back. To the flag or to the men hiding behind it. The words came out sharper than I intended. Grant's jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought I'd gone too far. Then he stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the line of soldiers marching across the courtyard below. You remind me of myself 30 years ago, he said finally. I thought I could change the system from the inside, but the system isn't made of walls, Captain. It's made of people, powerful people, and they don't move unless pushed from above. Then maybe it's time someone pushed, I said quietly. He turned back, expression weary. If you keep digging, Locke won't be your only problem. The moment his name appears in your reports, every flag officer in D.C. will close ranks. You'll be transferred, suspended, maybe worse. I'm not afraid of suspension. You should be afraid of irrelevance, he said. Once your clearance is gone, your voice won't matter. You'll be shouting into a void. I swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling over me. Sir, with respect, I can't ignore what I know. A cadet almost died because of a cover-up. If we let that stand, what does honor even mean? Grant stared at me for a long time, then walked to his cabinet. He poured himself a drink, not alcohol, just black coffee, and spoke without turning. You think honor is simple. It's not. It's the one word everyone uses to justify their own reflection. He took a sip, then faced me again. I'll make this easy. You have 2 choices. You hand over your evidence and let the proper channels handle it, or I file a report citing insubordination. I almost laughed. Proper channels, the same ones that buried her case. You're walking a thin line. Ward, he warned. Step back before it breaks under you. My hands clenched at my sides. Sir, I won't. Then I'm putting you on administrative leave, effective immediately. The room went quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. He opened a drawer, pulled out a folder, and began writing. Turn in your weapon and credentials by end of day. You'll receive formal notice in the morning. You're grounding me, I said. Temporarily, he replied. Official reason, psychological fatigue. Unofficially, you're being protected from yourself. Protected, I said, voice rising. From what? Doing my job. He met my eyes. From people who don't like being watched. He signed the form and slid it across the desk. You want advice from an old soldier? The Army survives because it forgets. Don't become the exception that reminds it what memory costs. I didn't answer. I took the paper, saluted mechanically, and walked out. My boots echoed down the corridor, each step heavier than the last. Outside, the air smelled of rain. The clouds above Fort Myer were rolling in from the Potomac, dark and slow. I stopped under the eaves, looked down at the leave order in my hand, and felt something inside me fracture. Administrative leave? That was their polite way of saying silenced. I was no longer Captain Ward, U.S. Army Intelligence. I was just another liability waiting to be forgotten. That night, as I packed up my quarters, I found the letter from Ava again. The edges were soft now from handling, but the words still cut deep. If I don't come home, it's not the army that killed me. She had known. She had seen what I was only beginning to understand, that sometimes the enemy doesn't wear another flag. It wears the same uniform as you. Around midnight, I stood outside in the rain, the letter in one hand and my military ID in the other. I stared at the card, the embedded chip, the crest, the words, United States Army, honor through service. Then I slipped it into the fire pit and struck a match. The plastic curled, the gold lettering warped, and the flames turned blue before fading to ash. I whispered into the smoke. You wanted loyalty, General. You're about to see what loyalty to truth looks like. That was the night I made my choice. I would fight them, even if it meant losing everything. Because in the end, survival wasn't the goal. Honor was. They came for me before sunrise. 2 MPs in pressed uniforms stood outside my door, their faces blank as marble. Captain Ward, one said you're to accompany us to command headquarters. No cuffs, no raised voices, just procedure cold and practiced. I followed them through the rain to a waiting Humvee. The windshield wipers squeaked like a metronome, marking the rhythm of my undoing. At the gate, cameras flashed, reporters. Somehow, someone had leaked it. By noon, every military feed and internal bulletin carried the same headline. Officer breaches confidential orders. Captain Ward, under investigation for unauthorized conduct. The photo they used was old, my promotion ceremony at Quantico, back when my smile still meant something. The article beneath it painted me as reckless, insubordinate, unstable. It quoted an anonymous Pentagon source saying I had compromised classified operations. None of it mentioned Ava. None of it mentioned truth. Grant wouldn't return my calls. Holden's line went dark. Even Martha stopped answering, likely warned to stay away. Isolation wasn't punishment, it was strategy. They didn't need to destroy me. They just had to make me disappear under enough paperwork that no one would remember why I'd mattered. I sat through hours of questioning from the Internal Review Board. No lawyers, no allies, just 3 officers behind a table asking the same question in different tones. Who authorized your investigation into General Locke's personal affairs? My answer never changed. No one. I acted on evidence. The word evidence made them flinch like sunlight in a dark room. They called it a breach of confidentiality, I called it duty. By the time they finished, the decision was already made. Effective immediately, one officer read, Captain Elise Ward is relieved of active duty and placed under indefinite administrative separation, pending review. I stared at the seal at the top of the page, Department of the Army embossed in gold. The same seal that had once made me proud now felt like a verdict. They escorted me back to my quarters to collect my belongings. My uniform hung neatly in the closet, the fabric still smelling faintly of starch and discipline. I folded it carefully, each crease perfect, each patch aligned. If they were going to take my rank, they wouldn't take my respect for it. Outside, the storm rolled in over Arlington. Thunder echoed like distant artillery. As I walked to the gate for the last time, the guard on duty, a young private I'd trained years ago, looked away when I approached. Shame has its own chain of command. He took my ID, scanned it, and said softly, Ma'am, I'm sorry. Don't be, I said. You're still inside. Stay there as long as you can. He didn't answer. When the gate clanged shut behind me, the sound felt final, like the end of a long campaign. I stood in the rain, my duffel heavy on my shoulder, and looked back once. The American flag above the headquarters flapped hard against the wind, its edges frayed but still flying. I whispered, Some wars don't end when the uniform comes off. The words lingered half curse, half prayer. I found a cheap motel off Route 29 that night, the kind where no one asks for ID if you pay in cash. The room smelled of bleach and mildew, the mattress thin enough to feel the springs. I spread my uniform across the bed and stared at the patches, the Army crest, the intelligence insignia, my name embroidered in block letters. Ward. The person that name belonged to didn't exist anymore. I poured the last of my bourbon into a glass, then stopped. I didn't need numbness. I needed clarity. I stepped outside under the awning, the rain pouring harder now, and pulled my old field lighter from my pocket. The metal felt cold against my fingers. Inside my jacket was my spare military ID, the backup I'd kept from an earlier posting, I held it in front of me, the gold lettering glinting under the motel's flickering neon sign. United States Army, Captain Elise Ward. You swore to serve, I whispered, and you did. Then I flicked the lighter. The flame caught immediately, orange reflected in the puddles at my feet. I held the card until it curled the plastic hissing as it melted the chip blistering under the heat. The wind shifted, carrying the smoke upward into the storm. It smelled of burnt metal and endings. When it was done, I dropped the ashes into the puddle and watched them dissolve. The rain washed everything clean except the memories. Inside, I sat by the window and watched the flag on the distant base fade into the darkness. They thought they had stripped me of everything rank, reputation, purpose. What they didn't understand was that they'd freed me. A soldier inside the system fights for orders. A soldier outside it fights for truth. My reflection in the glass looked older, harder, but alive. I picked up my phone, opened a blank message, and typed 3 words. We keep going. I sent it to Holden, hoping the signal found him wherever he'd gone. Then I leaned back, listening to the storm and the hum of the highway beyond the motel. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled again, low and steady. It sounded almost like marching boots. I closed my eyes and whispered to the darkness, "They can take the uniform. They can't take the mission." Virginia Pier in November was a graveyard of fog and seagulls, the kind of place where no one asked what you used to be. I worked the night shift as a security guard for the shipping depot, 12 hours of watching cargo containers that never seemed to move and listening to the river slap against the pylons. The Army had erased me from its system, but habit doesn't vanish with rank. I still polished my boots. I still checked the perimeter every hour. I still saluted the flag at sunrise even if no one was there to see it. The pier lights flickered as a freight train passed in the distance, its horn cutting through the cold. That's when I saw the figure walking out of the mist, hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched, same tired gait I'd know anywhere. "You're a hard woman to find," Holden said. His beard was longer now, streaked with gray, but his eyes hadn't lost that sharp detective glint. I nodded toward the security booth. "They pay me to watch ghosts." "You fit right in then," he said, offering a half smile. When we stepped inside, he shut the door and dropped a file onto the table. "I've got something," he said, "and you're not gonna like it." I opened the folder, expecting another falsified report, another thread leading nowhere, but the header froze me in place. Department of Justice, Witness Security Program 2018 Enrollment. My eyes scanned down the lines until I saw the name, Ava M. Locke. I blinked hard. "She's alive." "That's what it says," he replied. "But there's more. She's under a new identity, relocated somewhere in the Gulf region, Louisiana most likely. The program's tied to a joint defense initiative codenamed Homefront. Ever heard of it?" My throat felt dry. "No, and if it's linked to Locke, it's not protection, it's containment." Holden nodded grimly. "That's my read, too. Her file was flagged with a restricted clearance. Not FBI, not Marshall's military. Somebody rewrote the rules to keep her hidden." I sank into the chair. Why hide her? "Maybe she saw something she wasn't supposed to," he said. "Maybe she didn't die at Fort Benning because someone made sure she didn't. Either way, your general didn't lose a daughter, he buried a witness." I stared at the paper again, the government seal stamped across it like a coffin lid. Ava M. Locke, relocation confirmed. Psychological status stable. Memory suppression therapy recommended. Memory suppression, I repeated. "That's not witness protection. That's erasure." Holden took a sip from his coffee thermos. "There's a contractor listed on the form, Helix Dynamics, based in Arlington. You ever hear of them?" I shook my head. "They're not a military branch." "No," he said, "but they've got Pentagon contracts going back 15 years, specializing in cognitive trauma research. You think maybe Locke used his daughter as part of their experiments? I wanted to dismiss it, but every instinct I'd honed in the intelligence field screamed otherwise. You think she remembers anything? Not if they did their job right." The words hit me like a cold wind. Ava had spent her entire life trying to be seen by a man who only knew how to control. And now, even her memories belonged to him. I pushed the file back toward Holden. "We have to find her." Ward, that's not a rescue mission, he said quietly. That's a federal offense. She's a protected identity. If you track her, they'll track you. They already do, I said. I've been followed since the day I left the base. The difference is now I have a reason to fight back. He studied me for a moment, then sighed. You really don't know how to quit. No, I said, and neither did she. For a long time, we just listened to the rain tapping the metal roof. The air smelled of oil and salt. Outside, the fog thickened, wrapping the world in gray silence. You sure about this? Holden finally asked. Once we start digging into witness protection, there's no going back. I'm already gone, I said. The Army made sure of that. He chuckled dryly. Then I guess we're both ghosts now. I took the file again, memorizing every line, case number, handler, code, transfer date. May 3rd, 2018. The same week, Locke had her declared dead. My pulse quickened. He used the program as a cover. He didn't lose her. He relocated her under a fake federal order. Which means he's still got access, Holden said. Still pulling strings from inside. I stood pacing the small booth. We'll need access to the Homefront database, and that's under Joint Operations Command. I can spoof a login for about 5 minutes before their firewall locks me out. You still have clearance, he asked. Not officially, I said, but I remember the pathways. You never forget how the system hides its sins. Holden nodded. You get me in, I'll trace her alias. And then we find her before he does. Outside, a ship horn wailed low and distant. The sound echoed off the water like a warning. I looked at Holden, the fog outlining his silhouette like smoke around a battlefield. If we're right, I said, this doesn't just expose Locke. It exposes every person who helped him. You ready to burn that high? He asked. I've already burned everything else. He smiled faintly. Then let's get to work. That night after he left, I stood on the pier watching the reflection of the dock lights shimmer on the black water. Somewhere out there, Ava was alive, but living under a name that wasn't hers, surrounded by strangers, her past erased for someone else's convenience. The thought made my chest ache in a way I hadn't felt since I left the service. I reached into my pocket and touched the burned edge of my old military card, half melted, still sharp enough to cut skin. I pressed it against my thumb until it drew a small bead of blood, proof that I was still here, still fighting. I whispered into the cold, If you can hear me, Ava, hold on. I'm coming. The wind carried the words across the river, lost to the night. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt alive, because the dead don't hunt for ghosts. The living do. By the time the first tail showed up, I'd already expected it. You can always tell when the air around you changes the rhythm of footsteps, the delay at crosswalks, the echo of an engine idling too long. I spotted the sedan first parked half a block down from my building in Alexandria. Same car every night, different driver. Sometimes they'd switch to a gray SUV, other times a rental with temporary plates. But the pattern was military calculated, not freelance. General Locke had found me. Holden warned me to lay low, but hiding never suited me. That evening, I left my apartment wearing plain jeans, a windbreaker, and a baseball cap. I carried nothing traceable, no phone, no card, just a burner in my pocket and a folding knife strapped under my sleeve. I walked 3 blocks to a coffee shop, ordered tea I didn't drink, and waited. 10 minutes later, a man in civilian clothes entered, pretending to scroll his phone. His haircut gave him away, too clean, too recent. Army contractor, maybe CID. He chose a table near the door with a perfect line of sight to mine. Subtle. I smiled into my cup and checked my watch as if bored. Then I stood, left a tip, and walked out. When I turned the corner, I counted to 10 before slipping into an alley. The echo of his shoes followed right on cue. Alexandria's back streets were narrow, slick from rain, the kind of place sound carried but sight didn't. I let him close the distance, my heartbeat steady. When he turned the corner, he saw only shadows. That's when I moved, ducked low, pivoted behind him, and slammed his wrist into the brick wall until the phone dropped from his hand. He gasped, trying to twist free. "Who sent you?" I hissed. "Logistics Command," he choked out. "Name," I said. He hesitated just long enough to confirm what I already knew. "Locke." he whispered. I pressed harder. Why follow me? He said. You're jeopardizing national security. Funny, I said. That's what cowards always call truth. I stepped back and grabbed his phone from the ground. One text glowed on the screen. Subject active. Maintain surveillance until further notice. File Ref Project Homefront. I looked at him once more. Tell your general his shadow work's over. Then I shoved him back into the alley wall and walked away. My pulse pounded, but the fear was gone. In its place came a cold clarity. Project Homefront, the name I'd seen in Ava's relocation file. I needed access, but without my clearance that meant breaking in where digital firewalls turned curiosity into a crime. That night, I drove to Holden's safe house near Crystal City, a rundown storage unit hidden behind an auto shop. He was waiting with 2 laptops and a grin that didn't reach his eyes. You look like hell, he said. Good, I replied. It matches the mood. So what's this Project Homefront? Something Locke didn't want anyone to see, I said, tossing him the stolen phone. He scanned the screen, whistling softly. Government-grade encryption on the messages. You can't break this without triggering a trace. Then we won't break it, I said. We'll mirror it. I connected my laptop to his rig, launching a shadow port to the defense intranet, a pathway only old intelligence officers remembered. Within seconds, my screen flooded with firewalls and coded directories. You sure you want to poke this bear again? He asked. I never stopped, I said. Search parameter. Project Homefront restricted clearance. Initiated post 2018. The system hesitated, then flickered. A single result appeared. Project Homefront. Classified. Defense Relocation and Conditioning Program. Beneath it, a list of encrypted subfiles. Subject LM217. Status active. Handler T. Locke. Holden leaned forward. Conditioning. That's not witness protection. That's behavioral control. I opened the file summary, heart hammering. The document header bore Locke's electronic signature. It read, Implementation of Psychological Reprogramming for Subjects Under Protective Relocation. Objective mitigate memory retention of classified exposure. Holden exhaled slowly. He wiped her memory. Not just hers, I said. Probably others. Soldiers, witnesses, anyone who saw too much. Jesus, he whispered. He's building an army of silence. I downloaded the cache, each file transferring to my drive like pieces of stolen light. A few entries bore familiar names, people I'd known, officers transferred abruptly, families relocated for security. The realization hit like a bullet. Ava wasn't alone. She was one of many. We need to leak this, Holden said. Not yet, I replied. We need proof Locke authorized it personally. You already have his signature. I need his voice. The hum of rain outside grew louder. I turned off the main light and watched the reflections dance across the steel floor. He's tracking me, I said quietly. That means he'll reach out soon, either to warn me or to end it. When he does, I'll record everything. You're turning yourself into bait. That's the only way to catch a predator who hunts in daylight. Holden sighed. You sure you're not still a soldier? I met his eyes. The army forgot me. But the fight didn't. Later, after he left, I sat alone in the dim light scrolling through the recovered files. Each line was a confession buried under bureaucracy. Subject demonstrates recurring anxiety patterns tied to paternal authority. Recommend deep cognitive reinforcement. It was Ava. Her therapy notes, her identity reduced to metrics. I pressed my hand against the screen, tracing the outline of her initials. She had survived everything only to become a ghost living under her father's command. The rage that burned through me then wasn't loud, it was surgical, cold, focused. I closed the laptop, packed my gear, and stood. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the streets of Alexandria gleamed like wet steel. Somewhere out there, Locke was tightening his net. I whispered into the wind, "Come find me, General," because now I wasn't hiding. I was hunting back. The Pentagon at night feels like the heart of a sleeping animal, quiet, immense, and dangerous if you wake it wrong. I parked 2 blocks away, using an old contractor badge Holden had forged from a design we pulled out of the defense archives. My uniform days were long gone, but the muscle memory of infiltration never fades. I wore a dark maintenance jacket, hair tied back, ID clipped just low enough to look legitimate. The guards barely glanced up as I swiped through the first checkpoint. That was the thing about power, it trusted its own reflection. Inside, the halls gleamed under dim fluorescent lights. Everything smelled of waxed floors and cold air conditioning. I moved with practiced calm through the West Corridor, past framed photos of generals and war heroes' faces that looked noble in print, monstrous in what I now knew. Locke's portrait hung among them, the caption beneath reading, "For exceptional service and strategic innovation." I resisted the urge to tear it off the wall. Down the next hall, I slipped into the secure archives annex using a code from an old Army logistics string still active under my service ID. They'd erased my clearance but forgot the ghost permissions buried in the system. A digital oversight. It wouldn't last long. The database chamber was massive rows of terminals glowing blue in the dark servers humming like distant engines. I found the classified operations archive node and keyed in the string we'd uncovered Project Homefront. The screen paused, then flashed red. Access restricted tier Omega. I smiled faintly. That's the one. I connected my portable drive, launched a shadow copy, and let the code spin. It was like pulling thread from a spider web. You had to move slow enough not to trigger alarms fast enough to avoid lockout. The terminal flickered, and suddenly the files began appearing one by one. I opened the first budgetary allocation report, fiscal year 2018. What I saw made my stomach turn. The defense training budget had been diverted through a dummy foundation Helix Dynamics Research Fund, the same organization Holden had traced earlier. Funds listed as Psychological Reinforcement Program had instead been funneled into offshore accounts registered under a private defense firm called Orion Stratworks. Locke's signature sat at the bottom of every authorization form. I clicked into a subfolder titled Program Justification. The document was a memo addressed to the Secretary of Defense marked Eyes Only. It read, "Homefront represents a new frontier of soldier conditioning and loyalty management. Select recruits exposed to compromised environments require behavioral stabilization for post-service integration. Secondary benefit operational discretion and control over subjects with classified exposure." I scrolled further. Collateral incidents to be reported as accidents where necessary. The phrase, collateral incidents, froze me. I clicked the attachment. There it was, incident log number B2709. Fort Benning. Training accident, Cadet Ava M. Locke. Outcome, non-fatal subject relocated under protective containment per protocol. A digital photo was attached, Ava on a gurney, oxygen mask on her face, eyes closed but alive. I couldn't breathe for a second. They'd staged her death not to protect her, but to silence her. The next document was worse, a transcript from a meeting between Locke and Helix executives. Locke. She found the Helix invoices. "She's been asking too many questions." Helix. "You want us to extract or erase?" Locke. "Both." The words blurred. My pulse pounded in my ears. I knew what extract meant in military terms: containment. Erase meant memory suppression. Ava hadn't just been a casualty of his program. She had become proof of it, and he'd wiped her to keep the machine running. I copied everything, encrypting it twice. The data filled the drive line after line of betrayal. I could hear faint footsteps down the hall, night patrol maybe, but I kept going. Another folder labeled External Partnerships opened to reveal transfers totaling $50 million to a weapons manufacturing company under Orion Stratworks. The purpose field read Experimental Biotechnical Weapons and Field Adaptability Testing. Locke wasn't just using Army funds to hide family secrets. He was bankrolling private war tech under government cover. When the footsteps got closer, I unplugged the drive and slipped it into my jacket. The terminal flickered again, then dimmed. A voice came from behind me. "I wondered how long before you'd find this place." I froze. The voice was low, calm male. I turned slowly. General Thomas Locke stood by the door, dressed in civilian clothes but wearing that same command presence like armor. He looked older now, but not weaker. "You always had a knack for getting into places you don't belong," he said. "You taught me that, sir," I replied. He smiled faintly. "Still saluting ghosts, are you? Only the ones that deserve it." His eyes flicked to the terminal. You think you've uncovered something shocking? You have no idea what those files mean. They mean your daughter was right, I said, and you destroyed her for it. His jaw tightened. She was compromised. She would have ruined everything. You mean your funding, your private army. I took a step closer. You turned soldiers into experiments. He didn't flinch. They volunteered. She didn't. For a moment, the mask slipped. His voice hardened. Ava was weak, always running from discipline. I gave her structure and she repaid me with betrayal. You call it betrayal, I said. I call it survival. He smiled again, colder this time. You think this ends with me? You'll go public and the system will swallow you whole. No one exposes the hand that feeds the country. Then I'll break its fingers. His expression didn't change, but his tone did. You always were too sentimental for intelligence work. He turned toward the door. Walk away, Ward. This isn't your war. No, I said quietly. It's yours. And I just brought the ammunition. I slipped past him, every instinct screaming to move fast but steady. By the time the alarm lights flared red behind me, I was already out the side exit, rain slicking the pavement, the stolen drive pressed against my chest. My car waited 2 blocks down. As I started the engine, I looked once in the mirror. Locke stood at the far end of the lot, watching his coat whipping in the wind. Neither of us moved. Then I whispered, You buried your daughter, General. Now I'll bury your empire. We set the date with care, not because it would make the truth any truer, but because the symbolism mattered. Veterans Memorial Day, May 31st, 2021. The National Mall would be full of families, lawmakers, press, and retired officers who still believed in what the uniform represented. If the country was going to see what the uniform had protected, then it would see it there in plain sight. Holden, Martha, and I met in a cramped safe house 2 weeks before the event. Our war room consisting of a folding table, 3 laptops, and a stack of physical evidence that felt heavier than any weapon I had ever carried. Holden handled logistics. He had a list of contacts, a schedule of press arrivals, and a plan to plant the proof where it could not be ignored. Martha brought what she had, voice steady but small hands shaking when she handed me a flash drive wrapped in masking tape. This is everything I could pull from boxes he never thought to check, she said. Photos. The therapist notes the original letter Ava wrote when she was a kid. I set the drive next to the one I had taken from the Pentagon archives. The two together were a narrative that the Army had spent years trying to redact. We cataloged everything on paper because servers can be erased, but paper leaves a path. Redacted domestic incident, falsified medical reports, budget diversions to Orion Stratworks, Helix invoices, the Project Homefront cache. The smoking gun was a video file Holden had recovered from a contractor server timestamped March 12, 2018, labeled in bland administrative text as clinical session recording. The video showed a woman in a hospital gown, hair damp, voice thin. I watched it once in the safe house and my throat closed. A face I knew only from photos said, They told me the fire was a training accident. They told me I had nightmares. They told me to forget. I remember the sound of my mother crying and the way the door slammed. If I don't come home, it's because I'm trying. The woman's mouth formed the words Ava had written years earlier. The camera panned briefly and a clinician's voice said, Subject LM217 demonstrates compliant regression. Recommend prolonged conditioning. That sentence was the admission. The footage proved they had staged her death and then conditioned her to accept it. Martha sat with her hands over her mouth, small sobs choking out behind her palm. Then she looked at us and said, We have to show them. We rehearsed like a military operation. Holden arranged a secure playback method that would allow us to hijack a public feed. He knew a man on the inside at a broadcast provider, a veteran who remembered what truth looked like. We could not broadcast on the big screens without physical access. Instead, we would upload the files to a cloud server under a credible news embargo label, then trigger the release at a precise time while a major news outlet was airing live coverage. The idea was to make it look like the network had obtained the footage, not a rogue upload. We met with a trusted freelance journalist in D.C. who agreed to take custody of the evidence under strict conditions, and he promised to be ready to cue playback the moment we gave the signal. I thought about the ethics of what we were doing. It felt like breaking into a grave to pull a body back out and demand the truth. But truth had been buried by people waving flags and signing checks. We rehearsed our lines, the short statements we would release for press. I would speak as a former officer with evidence. Holden would summarize the forensic trail. Martha would speak last and watch the faces of those listening for a reaction only a mother could evoke. We practiced how to present the documents, where to place the flash drives on the table, so cameras could see them, how to hand the journalist the original Project Homefront cache without making it look like theft. Every movement was choreographed until it felt like muscle memory. The risk assessment was brutal and honest. If we failed, we would be charged with theft, unauthorized disclosure of classified material, and obstructing military procedure. If we succeeded, we exposed a general, a contractor network, and a program that had turned a daughter into evidence. The calculus was a kind of moral mathematics that doesn't balance cleanly. We also prepared for the human variable. Ava might not want to be found. She might have been so conditioned she would refuse to see her past. That possibility haunted me more than any indictment. Holden arranged to have a counselor on standby in case a survivor needed immediate care after exposure. We also planned an extraction schedule in case Martha or the journalist received threats. On May 31st, the mall was a sea of uniforms and civilian dress, an ocean of small flags and quiet faces. General Locke was scheduled to speak at 11 a.m., an invited guest of honor. We positioned ourselves near the broadcast crew, the journalist blending into the crowd with a legitimate press badge. At 10:58 a.m., I felt the old training settle into my bones. The team around me moved like well-drilled soldiers, timing breaths with the press cues. The journalist placed the flash drive in a secure locker on the perimeter tent, a location we could access through a prearranged signal. I had a microphone pinned neatly, a neutral statement prepared, my voice steady. When the general stepped up to the podium and the crowd applauded, the timing was perfect. At 11:05 a.m., during a live commentary break about veterans who served quietly, the journalist initiated the release. The network cut to a breaking story chyron and then to a clip that no one expected Ava alive, speaking about the night she was moved. The mall's volume shifted into an audible gasp. Cameras swung toward the broadcast vans, then back to the podium. You could physically feel the air in the crowd change. Locke froze mid-sentence. For the first time in years, his composure fractured. His eyes searched the faces in the front row as if trying to find a script he could read from. The clip continued with medical invoices, signatures, and a shaky handheld recording of a meeting where a contractor discussed memory suppression and relocation logistics. The network's on-screen caption read, "Exclusive leak reveals Project Homefront documents implicating senior defense officials and private contractors in witness relocation and conditioning." My heart pounded so hard I could taste it. Reporters swarmed the podium. Phones were out recording, streaming the sound of the moment folding itself into millions of devices. It was messy, raw, immediate. I spoke to the waiting journalist, my voice calm but fierce. "My name is Elise Ward. I served with honor. Today, I present evidence that contradicts the official narrative about Cadet Ava Locke's incident at Fort Benning." I laid the flash drives on the table and watched cameras lean in. Martha stepped forward last, tearful but resolute. "My daughter was taken from me. They told me she was dead. They lied. The reactions were immediate. Senators were on their phones. The crowd chanted a mixture of outrage and disbelief. Social media erupted. Within hours, the clip had been reposted by every major outlet. Messages poured into my phone. Some were threats. Many were thank yous. Old soldiers wrote that they had believed in duty until the day they saw what duty had been made to conceal. As we left the mall, sirens already starting in the distance, I felt the tremor of a country shifting. For the first time since this started, I thought victory might be possible, and yet even in that exhilaration, a sliver of fear remained. We had pulled the lever on a machine built to swallow secrets, and it might bite back with a force we could not predict. If truth could cost your freedom, would you still speak? The sun burned through a thin veil of cloud over Washington, D.C., turning the marble of the Lincoln Memorial a pale gold. Veterans Memorial Day had always been solemn, but this year the air felt heavier charged. The crowd at the National Mall stretched in every direction, families with flags, uniformed officers, reporters, tourists standing shoulder to shoulder. Banners flapped in the wind. A brass band played softly under a row of white tents, and at the center of it all stood the stage. General Thomas Locke stood behind the podium, medals glinting under the light, his voice booming through the speakers. "We stand today," he declared, "as sons and daughters of service bound by loyalty, united by honor." I stood about 30 yards away, the lanyard of my press badge cutting into my neck, my pulse steady but electric. In the command tent, Holden was crouched by the main feed switch, the journalist beside him pretending to check sound levels. Martha sat in the crowd, a scarf pulled over her hair, her hands shaking around the folded American flag she had kept since Ava's supposed death. Locke's voice rose practiced proud. "Our nation's strength lies in its truth. That was the cue." At that exact second, Holden's voice came over the earpiece. "It's live. You're up." I inhaled once and stepped closer to the broadcast van. The wind picked up rattling the metal rails. The big LED screen behind Locke's podium flickered once, just enough for him to glance over his shoulder. Then the image froze and changed. At first, it was static. Then the grainy picture of a hospital room appeared. A woman in a gown sat under dim light, her eyes down, hair tangled. Her voice quiet but clear filled the entire mall. "They told me it was an accident. They told me to forget. But I remember." The sound cut through the crowd like a blade. People turned toward the screen, confused. Locke hesitated mid-sentence. "What is—" He turned sharply, eyes narrowing as the audio continued. "My name is Ava Locke," the voice said. "I was part of Project Homefront. They said it was for my safety, but they erased me." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A soldier near the front whispered, "Did she say Locke?" The name spread like wildfire. "Locke! Locke! Locke!" The video zoomed in on Ava's face as she continued, voice shaking. "They wanted obedience. They called it loyalty. But loyalty without choice is captivity." The camera caught a brief glimpse of a man standing beside her, clipboard in hand, General Thomas Locke. Himself giving quiet orders. Gasps tore through the audience. Reporters scrambled to lift cameras. Someone shouted, "That's him. That's the general." Locke spun toward his production crew, barking, "Cut the feed!" "Cut it now." But Holden had already locked the controls. The video kept rolling, showing budget memos, Helix invoices, and signatures, his signatures. Every transaction, every falsified report, every cover-up was now public record, flashing 30 feet tall in front of the nation. "She's alive," Martha whispered, her hands trembling, tears sliding down her cheeks. "My baby's alive." The band stopped playing. The crowd was no longer silent. It was roaring. Some shouted questions, others disbelief. Veterans removed their caps, some crying openly. A reporter shouted into her microphone, "General Locke implicated in Project Homefront scandal. The evidence is streaming live from the memorial event." Locke's face drained of color. His hand tightened on the podium. "This is fabrication," he shouted, an act of cyber-terrorism, but no one was listening. The crowd had already moved beyond him. The truth had broken through the uniform. Security approached from both sides, 2 officers whispering into earpieces. One said quietly, "Sir, you need to come with us." "On whose authority?" Locke snapped. "Yours. The Department of Defense." "Sir?" the guard replied. The irony was surgical. As they stepped forward, he tried to push past them, but the cameras caught everything, the defiance, the fury, the denial. "You don't understand," he barked. "This country needs men like me." "Not anymore," one of the guards muttered. The crowd surged forward as he was escorted down the steps, hand on his arm, but not yet restrained. Some shouted insults, others prayers. A woman in uniform whispered, "For my brother," and saluted as he passed. On the screen, the last seconds of Ava's recording played, her voice fading calm now. "If truth costs me my freedom, I'll pay it." Because silence already took too much. The image froze on her face, then faded to black. The silence afterward was pure raw and overwhelming. Then applause erupted, not for Locke, not for me. but for the idea that someone had finally broken the silence. Veterans began chanting softly, "Honor, honor," and the sound grew until it filled the entire mall like a rising tide. Martha stood, tears streaking her face, whispering her daughter's name again and again. Holden appeared beside me, breathless but grinning. "We did it," he said. I nodded, unable to speak. "It's out. The servers are flooding with downloads. Every major outlet's already running it. There's no way they can bury it now." I looked up at the massive screen, black and empty, reflecting only the gray clouds above the city. Somewhere in some hidden facility, Ava might still be alive, but today the world knew what was done to her. The truth was no longer classified. The sound of helicopter blades cut through the distance, pressed security chaos converging. Holden grabbed my arm. "We need to move before they shut this down." I turned to Martha, who was still standing, her eyes closed, hands clutching the flag to her chest. "She heard you," I said. "Wherever she is, she knows now." Martha nodded through her tears. Then, it was worth it. As we slipped into the crowd, Locke's motorcade roared away under escort lights flashing red and blue. The wind shifted, carrying the echo of the chant "Honor, Truth, Justice," rolling over the mall like thunder. For years, I'd carried the weight of a secret buried under medals and lies. Now, the world was carrying it too. And as the flag over the Capitol snapped high in the wind, I felt the kind of silence only victory can bring. The courthouse at Fort Meade smelled like paper and bleach, sterile and official in a way designed to make lies feel small. I walked into the UCMJ chamber wearing civilian clothes because my uniform had already been taken, but I felt every stitch of that old fabric in my bones. The room was packed military council Pentagon observers, a smattering of press. One of the rare times the Army's internal judiciary looked like a theater for truth. The judge advocate banged the gavel and the proceedings began with the mechanical cadence of a machine that had swallowed too many lives to be surprised by outrage. The charges read against Thomas Locke were precise and brutal falsification of records, misappropriation of defense funds, unlawful use of classified materials, obstruction of justice, and willful endangerment of a minor. The list was long enough to stump a press release and short enough to startle a man used to being untouchable. I watched him across the room, smaller in person than the portraits, his medals a heavy, ridiculous thing pinned to civilian cloth. He had kept the posture of command for decades. Today, it looked like armor he could no longer fit into. Evidence was introduced in a methodical parade. Holden's forensic copies of the falsified training report, the Helix invoices trail showing the diversion of training budgets to Orion Stratworks, the Project Homefront cache, with its explicit purpose statements about memory suppression and relocation. We played the clinical tape of Ava on the large screen, and the chamber fell into a kind of stunned silence that felt almost like prayer. I watched faces change from professional neutrality to a raw human reaction, eyes reddening, mouths tightening, a general shifting his weight as if trying to step away from the truth. Martha's testimony came early, and I could see the way she prepared herself before rising. She held herself the way someone does when they are about to pass through a wall. She recounted in a steady voice the nights of doors slamming, the bruises. She hid the vanished police report, the attorney's files that had been sealed by federal review. She spoke of the letter Ava had written, the taped audio Martha had kept, and when the judge asked if she was certain of what she had seen and heard, her answer was simple and absolute yes. The court recorded it, the stamp of legality turning private agony into public fact. Holden testified with the rough cadences of a cop used to bad things and not flinching at them anymore. He walked through the chain of custody with cold precision, the recovered digital logs, the contractor's server that had been accessed the way Project Homefront's files had been tagged and signed by electronic authorization bearing Locke's credentials. He explained how funds moved through shell organizations and where they landed, how the conditioning language in Helix memos matched protocols used in other questionable programs. His voice never rose. He made malice sound like procedure, and that was worse than a shout. When it came to my turn, I sat in the witness box under the harsh lights and felt every eye in the room look for a crack in what I'd done. I recounted the rescue at Fort Benning in my own voice, the slope, the mud, the moment Ava's hand slipped, and the sound of gravel breaking loose. I spoke of the confidentiality order pressed into my hand, the redacted domestic incident file. I found the note on my Jeep, the copies Holden recovered the files I'd pulled from the Pentagon archives in the dark, the video I'd watched with Martha's hands trembling beside me. I watched the defense lawyers try to paint my actions as insubordination, recklessness, a breach of chain of command. I didn't flinch. I described the ledger entries and the invoices, the memos that called for behavioral stabilization and collateral incident reporting. I described the face in the tape that said, "They told me to forget," and I told the court that forgetting had been manufactured, not natural. When the prosecution played the March 12th clinical session, Ava's voice filled the chamber again, and even some of the men in uniform who'd been hired to dispassionately sit through evidence wiped their cheeks. The defense tried technicalities, chain of custody admissibility, the possibility of tampering. They called expert witnesses to say memory suppression terminology was common in trauma therapy and could be misinterpreted. They argued national security, claiming certain documents shouldn't be public because they touched on sensitive operational techniques. The judge listened and frowned at particulars, and for the first time in months, I saw someone wrestle publicly with the trade-offs between secrecy and accountability. Then the moment that mattered came cross-examination. Locke rose, his presence filling the aisle, and walked toward the witness stand with the easy confidence of a man used to playing rooms like chessboards. He stopped in front of me, his gaze sharp, and when he spoke, his voice was low but carried the old authority he believed had protected him. "You'll regret this," he said, the threat in his tone older than his jawline. The room fell quieter for a heartbeat, like the world holding its breath. There were a dozen ways he could have threatened me. Promotions, stripped careers, sacrificed legal retaliation, and none of them surprised me. I met his eyes and felt nothing but a memory of that rainy ridge at Fort Benning and the hand I'd held. I already did, once I said, voice steady enough to surprise even me. The answer landed like a small hard thing, and his face showed something like a crack, a flicker of recognition that perhaps his words had been less unique than he believed. The defense tried to recover calling character witnesses who described Locke as a pillar of service, a strategist whose contributions to national defense were beyond measure. Those testimonies were mise-en-scène older men in perfect suits, invoking the language of sacrifice, and they held sway in certain circles. But the prosecution then introduced the financial trail in a way that couldn't be poeticized offshore transfers invoices with locked dates, signatures authenticated by independent forensic analysts. The room's polite actors could not dress that in honor. When closing arguments came, the prosecutor's voice built like a tide, enumerating the victims, Ava, Martha, the soldiers reassigned in the wake of the program, and asking a simple thing. What is the Army if it becomes a tool for a man's private empire? The defense pleaded nuance and the weight of command, but the court was not a political forum. It was a place for facts to be weighed. After days of testimony, after pages upon pages of exhibits, after the legal machinery churned through objections and motions, the panel retired to deliberate. The wait was another kind of torture, the clack of typing, the soft shuffle of papers, the murmurs behind closed doors. When they returned, the lead judge's face had the stiffness of someone who'd had to choose between comfortable lies and an uncomfortable truth. He read the verdict with the same steady voice the officers used in promotion ceremonies. Guilty on counts of falsification, misappropriation, obstruction of justice. The panel recommended court-martial sentencing and referred certain matters to civilian prosecutors for the financial crimes. The room erupted, some in outrage, some in sobs, some in stunned silence. Locke's face went white. He looked at me once, fury and fear warring in his eyes, and mouthed something I couldn't hear. Martha wept openly, and Holden put a hand on my shoulder that said more than any salute. When it was all over, as reporters swarmed and the Pentagon scrambled statements, I stepped outside into a cold, bright day and breathed like someone allowed to come up from water. Retribution was not the same as healing. It was redress, a legal accounting for a life nearly erased. But in the quiet between the press and the paperwork, I felt the smallest thing begin to loosen inside a thread of rightness that no file could redact. The letter came on a gray morning 6 months after the verdict slipped beneath my apartment door with no return address. The paper was thick, the handwriting elegant and deliberate like every letter Locke had ever signed during his career. I stared at the envelope for almost an hour before opening it. Inside, the words were written in the same controlled script that used to command battalions and ruin reputations. "Captain Ward," he began, though the title no longer applied to me. "They've taken everything as expected. The stars, the rank, the home in Arlington. I've been moved to a rehabilitation facility in West Virginia, minimum security, though it feels like a mausoleum. The uniform I once wore is displayed here behind glass as if it belonged to someone else. I've had time to think. Too much time. And I keep thinking about that day on the cliff, the day you saved Ava. I understand now that you believed you were doing the right thing. Maybe you were. I'm not asking for forgiveness, only a chance to make things right. If there's a way you could help restore your position in the Army, I still have contacts who might assist. You belong there more than I ever did." It ended with 4 words that unsettled me more than the rest, for what it's worth. Thomas Locke. I read it twice, then set it on the table beside the empty coffee mug and watched the ink fade slightly in the morning light. It wasn't guilt that moved him to write. It was the unbearable realization that the power he once commanded no longer obeyed his voice. Redemption to him was another form of control, and yet something in me hesitated. Maybe closure required confrontation. 2 days later, I drove through the mountains of West Virginia, fog curling around the road like smoke from an old battlefield. The rehabilitation facility sat on a hill, once used as a training site, converted now into a halfway house for fallen officers. Its iron gates were modest, its security cameras unblinking. Inside the walls were pale and bare, except for framed photographs of medals that no longer existed. A guard escorted me down a corridor lined with doors, each marked with names stripped of rank. When we stopped at one labeled Thomas Locke, I asked the guard to leave me. He sat by the window when I entered, a man in a plain gray sweater, hair white, now face gaunt, but still holding the posture of authority. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize him. The last time I'd seen those eyes, they had been burning with fury across a courtroom. Now they looked hollow, searching. "Captain Ward," he said softly, turning his head. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I didn't come as captain anything I said. Just Elise." He nodded, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. Still blunt. I always respected that. "I didn't sit. Why did you write me?" He gestured to the window where mist drifted across the hills. "Because I have nothing left to command, and because I thought perhaps you might understand how quickly honor can become exile." "You think that's what this is?" I said. "Exile. You're lucky to still have air to breathe." His jaw tensed, but his voice stayed calm. "You don't believe in mercy. I believe in consequence," I said. He studied me for a long moment, the silence stretching between us. "I wasn't always the man you saw in court," he said finally. "When I joined the Army, I believed in duty, discipline. I believed control could build order out of chaos. Somewhere along the way, I started confusing obedience with loyalty. That confusion cost people their lives," I said. He nodded, "including my daughters." His voice cracked on the last word. "She won't see me. Her mother visits sometimes, says Ava's healing, but she won't talk to me. They tell me she remembers pieces now, faces, smells, but not me. Maybe that's the real punishment." I let his words hang. "It's not punishment," I said finally. "It's mercy. The kind you never gave anyone else." He looked down, his hands trembling slightly. "When I wrote you, I meant what I said. I could still make some calls. You deserve to serve again. You were always better than me at it." I took a slow step forward, the echo of boots against the tile sounding like the ghosts of our past. "You still think redemption is something you can give, don't you? A favor to trade for absolution." He looked up sharply, eyes wet. "I'm offering peace, Ward." I shook my head. "Redemption isn't offered. It's earned. And peace isn't yours to give." He flinched as if I'd struck him. The silence after that was long enough to hear the hum of the lights above us. He turned back to the window, and for the first time I saw tears on his face. Not loud, dramatic tears, quiet, hopeless ones. "I used to think the Army was my family," he whispered. "Now I see I built a cage and called it home." "Then live with that truth," I said. You owe it to everyone who never got the chance. When I turned to leave, he spoke again, voice barely audible. Do you ever regret it? Exposing me? I stopped at the door, hand on the frame. You told me once I'd regret it, I said. And you were right. I did. But only once. He nodded faintly, eyes fixed on the fog outside. Tell her. He started, then stopped. No. She doesn't need to hear from me anymore. I left without another word. Outside, the air was cold and clean, the kind that bites your lungs but makes you feel alive. I walked past the gates and looked back once. Through the window, I could see him still sitting there, motionless, staring into a world that no longer saluted him. The headlines that week were merciless. Disgraced General Locke, stripped of rank and pension. Subject to lifetime monitoring. Family declines contact. Martha never visited again. Ava, under her new identity, began working with the Veterans Recovery Foundation, quietly, privately rebuilding from the ashes her father left behind. That night, I sat in my apartment, Locke's letter still folded on the table. I lit a match, held it over the page, and whispered, "Redemption is earned, not offered." The paper curled, darkened, and turned to ash. When the last ember died, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Just free. The reinstatement letter came on a rainy morning almost 3 years to the day since I'd last worn the uniform. It arrived in a plain white envelope, no fanfare, no ceremony, just a seal that said Department of Defense. Veterans Justice Unit. The letter was brief. Captain Elise Ward is hereby restored to active advisory status, effective immediately with full clearance and honors. Her service record has been amended to reflect commendation for integrity and civic contribution. I read it twice before I let myself breathe. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was something quieter, steadier, a kind of peace that only comes after surviving your own fire. The reinstatement wasn't about returning to command. It was about finding a new way to serve. My new post was with the Veteran Justice Unit, a task force built to investigate corruption, benefits fraud, and systemic neglect among the military's own institutions. Irony, I thought, was its own promotion. My office overlooked the Potomac, and the walls were bare except for one framed document, the letter of reprimand that had once ended my career. I'd kept it to remind myself what silence costs. My first case involved a retired sergeant whose benefits had vanished after he filed a complaint against a contractor. It wasn't high profile, not the kind of thing that made news, but it mattered. For every soldier who had been erased by bureaucracy, I wanted their names spoken again. Some mornings when the hallways were empty and the coffee machine clicked, I'd think of Ava. Holden had told me she was under a monitored relocation program, still under partial protection, but allowed limited contact. The therapy had helped her recover fragments, voices, faces, moments of light. But her memory was like glass glued back together. The cracks never disappeared. Then, one afternoon, a secure email arrived. The subject line was blank. The message had no text, just coordinates and a date, Veteran Memorial Garden, Arlington, 1400 hours. I didn't tell anyone, I just went. The garden was quiet that day, the kind of late summer light that turns leaves silver and softens even the harshest stone. Rows of white markers stretched out under the sky. I walked slowly until I saw her. Ava stood near a bench under the shade of a maple tree, her hair longer now streaked with lighter tones. She wore simple clothes. Jeans, a light jacket, no badge, no sign of the world she'd survived. For a moment, I froze. She turned, and for a second her eyes searched mine the way someone scans a horizon they can't quite remember. Then she smiled, small and uncertain, but real. "You're her," she said softly. "The one who caught me." My throat tightened. "And you're her," I said. "The one who climbed back." She laughed, a sound both fragile and defiant. "I don't remember everything, just flashes. The rain, a hand pulling me up, a voice saying, 'Hold on.' I used to think it was a dream. It wasn't," I said. "You were stronger than anyone gave you credit for." She looked down at the gravel path, then back at me. "Mom told me what you did, what it cost you." I wanted to say thank you, but I didn't know if I should. "You don't owe me anything," I said. "You survived. That's thanks enough." We sat on the bench for a while, silence stretching between us, but never uncomfortable. She told me she was studying psychology working with a veterans foundation that helped trauma survivors reintegrate. Funny, isn't it? She said. After everything they did to erase me, I help people remember who they are. That's not funny, I said. That's poetic justice. She smiled again, this time steadier. They told me you got your commission back. Part of it, I said. Not the same rank. Different battlefield. Do you miss it? The old life. I thought about that for a moment. The answer wasn't simple. I missed the clarity, I said, not the chain of command. Just the part where right and wrong still meant something before politics drowned it. Maybe you're helping rebuild that, she said quietly. A small breeze rustled the leaves overhead, scattering sunlight across her face. For the first time, I saw peace in her expression, not the kind that forgets, but the kind that accepts. I wanted to say more, to tell her about the nights I'd stayed awake listening to the rain, wondering if she was still alive, but the words wouldn't come. Some stories don't need retelling when both people already know the ending. Instead, I said, if you ever need anything. She shook her head. I think I'm okay now. But thank you. She stood, offering her hand. I took it the same way I had years ago, only this time there was no fear in her grip, just warmth. Then she turned and walked toward the exit, the wind lifting her hair, sunlight catching the edge of her jacket. She didn't look back, and I didn't need her to. I sat there long after she was gone, watching the flag ripple above the memorial garden. The world had changed, but the weight of duty felt the same, steady, relentless, necessary. I thought of Locke then, alone in his facility, and of Martha rebuilding a life out of quiet advocacy. I thought of Holden, who had finally retired for real, saying, "Justice is like gravity. It doesn't care who you are. It just keeps pulling." When I finally rose to leave, I looked at the sky and spoke to no one and everyone. "Some truths don't free you," I whispered. "They prepare you to serve better." As I walked away, the wind carried the sound of distant bells across the mall. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking away from something. I was walking toward it. The hill at Arlington is quiet in a way that defies the noise of the city below. From here, the Potomac looks like a silver thread winding between history and the present. I stand where the ground is soft, the grass perfectly cut, rows of white markers stretching toward the horizon like punctuation marks in a story that never ends. The wind carries the smell of rain and stone, the kind of air that tastes like remembrance. I've stood on battlefields before deserts and jungles, and in rooms where silence hurt more than gunfire. But this hill feels different. It's sacred because it's honest. No rank, no medals, no politics, just names. Thousands of them, each carved by the same steady hand, each meaning something to someone who still whispers their name before sleep. My hand rests against the cold marble in front of me. Ava Locke. No title. No dates beyond her beginning and end. Just a name that had once been lost and found again. Someone had left a folded letter and a single white lily at the base of her stone. I didn't need to read it to know who it was from. Martha visited often. I came rarely, not because I'd forgotten, but because I carried her story with me every day. The Army had offered a public apology after Locke's conviction, a statement signed by officials who had never met her, saying words like oversight, accountability, systemic failure. They said the institution had learned. Maybe it had. Maybe it hadn't. What mattered was that the truth existed now, carved not only in stone, but in consequence. Behind me, the flag flaps lazily in the breeze. It's larger up close than it ever looks from below, and when it catches the light, it seems to move in slow motion. I've always thought flags were strange things, how they can mean both pride and pain at the same time. I used to salute it as a reflex, but now when I look at it, I see something else. Not a symbol of power, but a reminder of how fragile honor really is. The wind picks up, carrying the faint sound of a bugle from somewhere down the hill. Taps. A ceremony has begun for another soldier, another story. I close my eyes for a moment, listening. Every note feels like a pulse of memory, steady and inevitable. When the last one fades, the silence is heavier but not empty. I whisper, "Every family has its own war. Some we fight for blood, others for honor. The words taste metallic in my mouth, half confession, half vow. My own family's war was never on paper. My father had been a mechanic, my mother a nurse. Neither of them military, but their battles were fought in smaller ways. Bills, shifts, the kind of endurance that doesn't earn medals but builds character. I think of how different my path might have been if someone had told me that service isn't measured by uniform, that sometimes it's measured by what you refuse to let slide. The Honor Line project had grown beyond us now. What started as a small initiative for veterans had become a national foundation funded, structured, and somehow alive. Ava's name was on the charter, dedicated to those who were silenced by command and to those who broke it for the right reasons. I remember writing that mission statement late one night, my fingers trembling from fatigue and something deeper. We'd raised enough money to provide legal counsel for whistleblowers, mental health care for survivors of internal abuse, and educational grants for families who had lost someone to the machinery of the institution. We'd even partnered with the VA to reform reporting protocols, something Locke would have despised. And yet even now, I can't hate him the way I used to. Hate requires energy, and I've spent mine on rebuilding. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment, it's about correction. That realization took me years and the breaking of more illusions than I can count. I kneel down, brush some dirt off the base of the stone, and whisper, "You didn't just survive, Ava. You taught us how to serve better." My reflection shimmers faintly on the marble's surface. The woman looking back isn't the captain who once chased authority down dark corridors or the officer who saluted command even when it was wrong. She's older, yes, but quieter, lighter somehow. The world doesn't feel like an enemy anymore. It feels like a responsibility. I turn my gaze to the skyline. Washington glows faintly under a pale sun, the monuments like chess pieces against the horizon. I think of all the stories buried in those walls, heroes, villains, and the ones caught between. The system doesn't change in a day, but sometimes it cracks, and through that crack light seeps in. That's what the honor line became, a thin line of light across a very old map. Holden had retired fully last winter. He'd moved to Montana with his dog, sending postcards with sunsets and jokes scrawled in terrible handwriting. Martha had taken up painting again, landscapes mostly quiet scenes of lakes and trees that looked like forgiveness. And me, I stayed here not because I couldn't leave, but because there was still work to do. There always is. Behind me, a group of tourists passes quietly, their shoes crunching against the gravel. One woman pauses, looks at the headstones, and presses a hand to her chest before walking on. Maybe she doesn't know who Ava Locke was, maybe she never will, but she'll remember this hill. And maybe that's enough, because memory is contagious. So is courage. I stand, adjust my jacket, and salute not out of duty, but respect. The flag snaps once in the wind as if answering. Somewhere deep inside, I feel the echo of every soldier who stood for something bigger than themselves, who fought not just the wars assigned to them, but the ones they couldn't walk away from. The wars that happen inside, between silence and speech, obedience and truth. The wars that never make headlines. As I turn to leave, the wind rises again, swirling the dust into a small spiral before letting it fall. The sky darkens slightly, then clears as if the world is breathing with me. I whisper again, softer this time. Some truths don't free you. They prepare you to serve better. And for the first time, I believe it. The evening settles slow over Arlington, the sky burning from amber to indigo, the kind of color that feels like both an ending and a beginning. I stay on the hill long after the tourists leave, long after the last flag has been folded, because the quiet is a language I understand now. In the distance, the hum of the city fades to something softer, and the lights of the Pentagon blink faintly like a heartbeat that refuses to die. It's strange how you can still love the thing that nearly broke you. The Army taught me that loyalty isn't blind. It's the courage to keep believing in what something was meant to be, even when men like Locke turned it into something else. I think about him sometimes, about that day at the facility when I told him redemption had to be earned. He never wrote again after that. Last I heard, he was transferred to a long-term care unit for veterans with chronic illnesses. Some said he spent his days staring at a photograph of his daughter. Maybe that's punishment enough. Or maybe it's grace, depending on how you look at it. The older I get, the more I understand that justice isn't a single event. It's a cycle, a pattern that repeats until someone decides to stop it. That's what Ava did. That's what I tried to do. That's what so many before us tried and failed and tried again. I reach into my pocket and pull out the small silver pendant Ava gave me the day she left the witness program. It's simple, no design, just the letters EA 2006 etched in tiny script. Emily Ava, the year her life was taken and rewritten. She said she didn't want to keep it because it reminded her of what she'd lost. I keep it because it reminds me of what she rebuilt. The metal is warm from my hand. I close my fist around it, and for a second, I swear I can hear her laugh again, the soft one she gave at the lake that day when she told me she'd found peace. It's funny how sound can live longer than memory. The wind carries the faint smell of lilacs from somewhere down the slope, and I remember Martha once telling me that Ava used to press flowers into her journals as a kid. Every petal she said was a promise she'd come back. I didn't understand it then. I do now. Coming back isn't always about returning. Sometimes it's about reclaiming who you were before the world taught you fear. My phone buzzes in my pocket, a message from the Honor Line headquarters. A new case request, a retired airman facing retaliation after exposing fraudulent veteran claims. I read the details, the familiar bureaucratic language, and feel that old fire rise again, calm but certain. The fight never ends. It just changes uniforms. I text back, I'll take it, and slip the phone away. As the sun dips lower, the first stars appear faint but insistent. I think about every person I've met on this path, the whistleblowers who risked careers to tell the truth, the families who never got closure, the officers who still believe integrity can survive politics. They're my real unit now. No rank, no salutes, just conviction. That's the thing about honor, it doesn't die when you lose your uniform. It multiplies in those who keep walking forward when no one's watching. I start down the path toward the memorial wall. Each step feels like a heartbeat, steady and deliberate. Along the way, I pass a group of young cadets visiting the grounds. They're whispering, joking the way we all did once before the world taught us what loss tastes like. One of them notices my badge, the small gold pin that reads Veterans Justice Unit, and asks shyly, "Ma'am, were you ever in the service?" For a moment, I want to say no to avoid the weight that always follows, but I see the hope in his eyes and I realize this is how the line continues. "Yes," I say. "Still am in a way." He nods, not understanding fully but respecting the tone. When they move on, I feel something ease in my chest. That's the quiet kind of victory, the one where belief survives beyond you. The memorial wall gleams under the twilight. I trace my fingers over names I'll never know. Some are soldiers, some medics, some civilians caught in crossfire. Each one reminds me that courage doesn't always wear combat boots. Sometimes it wears a badge, a notebook, a voice that refuses to shake. I remember the Senate hearing months after the trial when they asked me to testify again, this time about systemic reform. One senator asked, "What do you think the military's biggest enemy is today?" I remember pausing, feeling every eye on me before I answered silence. The word echoed through the chamber. You could almost hear the gears grinding in their minds. Because silence is easy, it keeps systems running smoothly. Truth, though, it demands rebuilding. The next morning after that hearing, I got an envelope from a staff sergeant I'd never met. Inside was a handwritten note that simply said, "My daughter joined because of you. Thank you for reminding us that the uniform isn't what gives us honor, it's what we do when no one's looking." I keep that note pinned above my desk even now. On this hill, under this fading light, it all comes back. The faces, the choices, the cost. People like Locke believed legacy was built by power. People like Ava proved it's built by truth. The contrast defines everything. Maybe that's what our wars are really about, not domination, but definition. Who we become when we stop obeying fear. The moon rises fully now, pale and solemn above the flag. I tilt my head up to it, letting the cool air wash over me. Somewhere below, I can hear traffic, the hum of ordinary life continuing. I used to envy people who lived without ghosts. Now I think maybe we all have them. We just choose what to do with them, bury them, or build with them. I reach the edge of the hill where the path descends back toward the parking lot. A single streetlight flickers to life. For a moment, I imagine Ava walking beside me just like that night by the lake, quiet but unafraid. I can almost hear her voice saying, "You once told me truth deserves daylight, even if it burns." I smile, whispering back, "It does, and it still does." Before leaving, I glance back one last time at her stone barely visible in the dim light, but the white of the lily still glows faintly. That's how legacy works. It glows even when the world grows dark. I take a deep breath and start walking. The gravel crunches beneath my boots, a rhythm I've known all my life. Somewhere in that rhythm, in that quiet movement down the hill, I find my next step, my next mission, my next dawn. Because wars don't end, they evolve. And honor, real honor, doesn't fade. It changes form, passing from one hand to another, one name to the next, one story to those still listening. Night has fully settled over Arlington now, that kind of deep quiet that only happens in places where memory outweighs sound. The flag on the hill is barely visible, illuminated by a single floodlight, each ripple sharp against the dark. I sit on a stone bench overlooking the rows of graves, feeling the cool marble press into my palms, grounding me. It's strange how peace can feel so heavy. In the distance, the Washington Monument stands tall, a pale needle of light against the horizon. Beyond that, the city hums, the same city that once swallowed me whole, that taught me what it costs to tell the truth. I'm not bitter anymore. You can't carry both truth and bitterness. One will always strangle the other. I close my eyes and think about all the names, all the people whose stories won't ever make it to a hearing or a headline. Some of them were silenced by fear, some by power, some simply by time. They deserve to be remembered not as casualties of command, but as reminders that silence has never been neutral. Every soldier knows that standing still on a battlefield is a decision too. The air grows colder. I pull my jacket tighter and let my thoughts drift. When I first enlisted, I believed in clarity, orders, missions, outcomes. But real service doesn't fit inside mission briefs. It lives in the gray areas, in the choices you make when there's no one to applaud you. That's the kind of service I understand now, the quiet kind, the one that leaves scars no one sees, but that still shape everything you touch. Sometimes when I'm filing reports at the Veterans Justice Unit, I still hear Locke's voice in my head, his anger, his pride, his regret. I don't forgive him, but I understand him. Men like him were built by an era that worshipped control and mistook obedience for honor. They taught us to obey the chain of command even when the chain was strangling us. But people like Ava broke that cycle by surviving it. I think that's why she haunts me less now. She won her war by living, not by fighting. My phone buzzes again. A notification from the Honor Line's social feed, another veteran story, trending, another whistleblower stepping forward. The comments are full of gratitude and fury of people arguing and defending and finally listening. That's what change looks like, messy, loud, uncomfortable. But it's movement, and movement means hope. I scroll for a moment and see someone post a quote from Ava's speech at the memorial we held last year. Sometimes justice isn't loud. It whispers in the spaces where people finally stop lying. I feel a lump form in my throat. She's right. Truth doesn't always roar. It lingers quietly until someone brave enough decides to say it out loud. A gust of wind blows across the hill, and I can almost hear the echo of boots marching, hundreds of them ghosts from every generation. My hand instinctively rises in salute, not as a gesture of command, but of solidarity. I whisper softly, "We kept the line, didn't we?" Because that's what the Honor Line really meant. It wasn't a slogan or an organization. It was a promise, a thread connecting every soldier who chose conscience over comfort. And I know it doesn't end here. Tomorrow, someone else will take up the story, write another report, uncover another lie. That's how honor survives, not by preservation, but by evolution. The first drops of rain begin to fall soft at first, then steadier. I tilt my face toward the sky and let it happen. The water runs cold down my cheeks, mixing with something else, maybe relief, maybe grief. Lightning flashes far off beyond the river, illuminating the hill for a heartbeat, every headstone gleaming white. It feels like the universe itself is saluting. I breathe in deeply, the scent of wet grass and stone filling my lungs, and let the silence speak for a moment longer. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wails, then fades. I realize it's time to go. I rise slowly, brush the rain from my coat, and take one last look at the field of marble in light. In the reflection of a nearby plaque, I see my own face, older lined, but at peace. The caption beneath the plaque reads, "For those who served with integrity beyond orders." I smile faintly because for the first time I feel like I belong there. As I start down the path, I hear footsteps behind me. It's a group of young officers walking together, their voices low but eager. One of them is reading something on his phone, a quote, maybe a post from the Honor Line feed, and I catch a few words as they pass. Truth still matters. It hits me hard in the chest, a pulse of recognition, of continuity. I want to turn around and tell them everything about Ava, about Locke, about how sometimes doing the right thing feels like falling off a cliff and hoping you land on something solid. But they don't need to hear it from me. They're already walking that path. When I reach the gate, the guard nods in quiet acknowledgement. He doesn't ask who I came for. He doesn't have to. The flag above us snaps once more in the wind, sharp and proud. I stop there under the floodlight's pale beam and let the moment stretch. I raise my hand in one last salute, not for a rank, not for a command, but for the truth that survived all of it. Then softly, I speak not just to the night, but to whoever might still be listening across the country, across time, across every small war that people fight in silence. If you believe, truth still matters. I whisper, voice steady and full of something that feels like hope. Drop your city and local time below and keep the Honor Line alive. It's not a request. It's an invitation. For every person who's ever kept quiet out of fear, for every soldier who's ever been told to look away, for every parent who's ever taught their child to stand up even when it costs them, this is for them. The rain intensifies, but I stay for another minute watching the droplets blur the lights of the Capitol in the distance. Somewhere down there, decisions are still being made. Stories still being buried, but here on this hill, under this sky, the truth stands tall. I lower my hand, take one last breath of the cool, wet air, and start walking toward the parking lot. The night feels endless, but the road ahead gleams faintly with reflected light enough to follow. That's all truth ever needs, someone to keep walking, even when the world would rather forget. And as the camera of memory pulls back the flag in the rain, the hill of white stones, the single figure moving forward, you can almost hear the final line whispered through the storm. Every family has its own war. Some we fight for blood, others for honor. Then everything fades, flag first, then rain, then the light. Only the echo remains. Honor isn't about medals, it's about promises kept.